Welcome to this week's video shir. This week, of course, we began Perek Elu Trefos, which deals with all the different laws of cases where an animal becomes a treif as a result of various defects, injuries, where essentially the idea is the animal's not going to survive. And the Torah says, in such a case, even if it receives a proper ritual shechita, it's not kosher. Right at the beginning of the Perek, we come back to a classic Shas concept called Chazaka. Chazaka means that the Torah says, in many instances, if there is a halachic uncertainty, we presume like the previously known status. So the Gemara talks about, we're on Mem Gimel Amid Beis. The Gemara discusses a case where some lion or some predator entered a pen where we had a bunch of flock of animals, and they clearly weren't so happy. They were moving away, and so there's a real possibility that one of the animals was attacked, which would make it a drusa. That's one of the treifos. If it's attacked by something like a lion, clawed by a lion, then it's a treifa. So we're not sure if maybe became a treifa. Then we went and shechted the animal. So what is the halacha? The Gemara tells us that it's a dispute. We have two opinions in the Gemara. So the lenient opinion is seemingly readily understandable. The lenient opinion says, okay, what was the previous status? Before this question came up, it wasn't drusa, it wasn't a mauled animal. So we should apply the idea of chazaka, that the Torah should allow us to continue on that assumption. And so Ula says, but what about the stringent opinion? So Tosfos asks the question, that what happened to chazaka? He quotes the Gemara in Tes, where we see we use chazaka to deal with questions in these kind of situations. So why doesn't the stringent opinion here follow chazaka? Tosfos he ultimately answers that here it's different because the particular possibility that got attacked is very likely. It's a strong likelihood, and so this opinion in the Gemara says we don't follow chazaka. Tosfos says the halacha follows that opinion. Now there is a question that you could ask on Tosfos' question, which is that, one second here, who says that chazaka applies in our situation? Actually, if we think about it, it would seem at least that chazaka should say the opposite. Because let's think about this. When did the question come up? When did this situation arise where maybe the animal's not kosher? Not after the shechita. The question came up when the animal was still alive. And of course, a live animal is prohibited. So, seemingly, just the opposite. We're starting with the prohibited status. So now, maybe something happened. Maybe he was attacked by a lion, so that of course the shechita doesn't work. And so, seemingly Chazaka says that, all right, we have to assume like the previous status, which was what? That it was prohibited. So what does Tosfos mean here? Now Tosfos himself brings this up. He says, if you're going to say that to back to my argument, he says it's not true. He brings a Gemara in Yavamis, and Tosfos lays out his opinion that that's not the way it works for the following reason. Because of course, let's think about the specific prohibited status here. What's the prohibited status that we are using to argue against Tosfos? It is the fact that it was alive. Well, is the animal alive now? Obviously not. It's pretty dead now. We did shechita. So when the reason for the prohibited status that you want to use for chazaka is no longer relevant, in the opinion of Tosfos, we don't use such a chazaka. It's not relevant. Rather, we say, the only thing really we have here is that, okay, before this question came up, it wasn't known to have been attacked. Now you're saying maybe it got attacked, so we don't have to assume that happened. Therefore, really, again, in theory, it should be permitted here, if not for the fact that this particular possibility is, that got attacked is very likely. That is the view of Tosfos. But the Rashba and the Ran argue with Tosfos. They say, no, that's not true. In their opinion, the Chazaka still pertains. Even if the reason, the particular Chazaka that we started with, which again is that the Isra of Ever Min Achad, it was alive, even if that particular status doesn't pertain, we still use Chazaka. We say, look, the animal previously was prohibited. We have a question. Chazaka says that we assume the status didn't change. It does still apply in our situation. Now, the Rashba brings a proof to this, so that means he's bringing a proof against Tosfos. He brings a proof actually from right next to almost just the next sentence of the very Gemara that Tosfos quotes on Tesam and Aleph. The Gemara there says the following, where it discusses, let's say we have a question about the shechita, whether it was a proper shechita. Did he do the action of the shechita in the correct way? So the Gemara says, okay, we don't know what happened here, so we follow Chazaka. That is, that before shechita, the animal was alive and therefore prohibited. Chazaka says we can't assume that status changed unless we know that for a fact. So the animal is prohibited. So the Rashba says, what do you mean? But it's dead. The reason for that original prohibited status obviously is not relevant anymore. Yet the Gemara is saying we use Chazaka. So we see, that's really the way it works. So we don't need to say Tosfos' answer. The Rashba says that, the possibility that it got attacked is, very likely. That's why, Chazaka, the animal is definitely prohibited because it had a prohibited status while it was alive. Okay, it's not alive anymore, but the prohibited status itself carries over, and so it's prohibited. So the question is, what could we say for Tosfos? Would Tosfos respond to this Gemara that the Rashba brings against him? So I'd like to suggest that maybe Tosfos would say as follows. How do we understand the basic concept, the mitzvah of shechita? Maybe Tosfos understands that what the Torah is basically saying is that you can't eat animals. Doesn't matter what kind of animal. You can't eat an animal. You can make an animal kosher. There's a way that you can make it kosher through ritual shechita. If that's what shechita means, well then, we look at this case in a whole different light. It's actually very obvious why the Gemara back there on Tes says that we use Chazak. Yeah, Tosfos would say, I know the animal's dead, I know that. But there, we have to ask ourselves, what is the question? The question there is, we don't know if shechita was done. We don't know. We don't know if they did a proper act of shechita. What that means is that we don't know whether this person, essentially created something kosher, whether he made something from, this is an animal, you can't eat an animal, into, he did something to make it into kosher. If we understand the halacha that way, then of course Chazaka applies. Because the bottom line is that I have no idea whether I supply that positive ingredient that I need called shechita. I don't know if that was provided. And so we're going to have to assume, like the situation was previously, of course, which was there wasn't a shechita. You think maybe you did a shechita, you did what has to be done to make this permitted, but you don't know if you did that, therefore it's prohibited. That's why we use chazaka, that kind of chazaka. As opposed to in our Gemara, where that's not the question. The question is not, was it a good shechita? No, we know it was a good shechita. The question is, maybe it became a treifa before the shechita. Tosfos says, okay, to that, let's look at Chazaka. The Chazaka was that prior to all this, it was not a treifa, so we continue to assume it's not a treifa. It was prohibited as Ever Min Achai when it was alive. But Tosfos says that's not relevant because it's not alive anymore. It's very dead now. Therefore, we do not, that's not how the Chazaka plays out in our Gemara. Maybe that's a reading for Tosfos. Definitely an interesting discussion. Let me know if you have any feedback about this, any other understanding of Tosfos, and we'll see you in the next video.